Hey, what's up? I'm Channel Pup Fanboy Supervillain, and today I'm making slop. In other words, it's time for another ranking video. Now, I did do a similar thing in 2019 when I did all the Sonic designs ranked, but I won't lie, looking back, that list is very confused on what it actually wants to be. Sometimes I was ranking in-game models, sometimes renders. So for this one, I've decided to focus up. We'll be ranking strictly in-game models and sprites. Subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to become my boss, the link to the Patreon page is in the description below. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be honest, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a time when Sonic hasn't looked kind of good. It's just a really, really good design. So what is this ranking based on, really? How much serotonin is released in my brain when I see them. That's ultimately going to be the deciding factor. I might discuss some objective factors, but ultimately this is as personal and subjective as a ranking gets. So yeah, it's a demonstration of taste, I guess. And this is just overall how Sonic looks. So it could just be a change in textures or shaders, or it could be a complete topology overdo. You get the idea. So in at number 30 is Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1. Just all-round misguided. They've basically taken the modern Sonic, who is traditionally seen in 3D, and posterized him to make him fit in with this very illustrated world, and he simply doesn't belong here. I think the environments of Sonic 4 Episode 1 look pretty good, but they are clearly illustrations, so when you have these 3D models running around these illustrations, that is something that can look good, but in this case doesn't. Classic Sonic would look a lot more at home here, but the most egregious thing about this particular Sonic is just how shiny he is. Like someone took Sonic and stretched a condom over him. It's no good. In at number 29 is Sonic Heroes. Continuing the trend of very lubed up, slippery looking Sonics, this particular model here moves away from the more rounded and curvy Sonic that we saw in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 in favor of this very stretchy, Gumby-like body type. And I think that works overall. This is a much more angular Sonic design though, and you'll see that more angular designs for Sonic aren't really my preference. I quite like his cartoony eye textures though, I'll say that much. But yeah, he also falls prey to the whole looking like a plastic action figure thing. He is just a bit too shiny. Not nearly as egregious as Sonic 4 Episode 1, but still not great. In at number 28 is the model from Sonic Colors. And by no means is this a bad model. From here, I think all of these look at least good. What we basically have here is your typical modern Sonic in post-2008, but he's a bit more low poly this time, and with standard definition textures. However, those textures are meant to kind of be a bit more representative of the lighting that the Wii can't achieve. And I think they did do a really good job with that. Something I also quite like is that his mouth, rather than actually being a modeled mouth, is just a little texture, which means he has his signature smirk all the while you're playing the game. This one is overall fine. As far as downgrades go, this one had a pretty graceful transition. In at number 27 is Sonic's model from Sonic Adventure, DX. Yeah, you thought I was going to do him dirty, didn't you? No, this spot is just the DX version, which is not really a bad model, I just don't like it anywhere near as much as the original Dreamcast Sonic Adventure model, which I will talk about later. This one really just gets dock points for being a very unnecessary downgrade. But there are some things it does still do well. Facial emoting is still fairly smooth, particularly on the mouth this time. He's nice and saturated as well. And this is one of the few models on this list that can kind of pull off that shiny toy effect. It looks better than it does in other games, partially because the highlights are also colored, as opposed to Sonic being covered in white accents. And credit where it's due, this model did give Sonic individual fingers, which objectively speaking is probably an upgrade from the original model. It's weird because it definitely has different design sensibilities to the original Sonic Adventure Dreamcast model. That model tried to go somewhat realistic by having like fur textures on him, where this one leans fully into the cartoony direction. Kinda weird to re-release the same game, except the main character models are just slightly more cartoony. There is still a special place in my heart for the Sonic Adventure DX model, but the poor thing just being a downgrade from the original definitely hurts this one. In at number 26 is Sonic Force's Classic Sonic. Now, this is less on the actual model itself, more so on how it was utilized with, say, the lighting engine, but this poor guy just looks anemic. He looks outrageously pale. Hurt further by just how flat his texturing is. Highlights and shadows are barely existent on this poor little guy. He also doesn't end up animated particularly well either, looking just perpetually surprised. Yeah, this ain't your best day, Neoclassic Sonic. In number 25 is the Sonic Forces Modern Sonic. Now, all of my issues with the classic Sonic basically apply to this one, but to a lesser extent. Modern Sonic is at least a bit darker than classic Sonic, but he's still a bit too pale for my liking. Once again, very flat. He just doesn't look very tangible. I dare say this guy interacts with light in a less dynamic way than what the Sonic Colors model did, and they had to cheat all of that. Sonic just looks so smooth in this game. And that wouldn't be a bad thing if it weren't so at odds with the overall art style and the lighting of Sonic Forces. There are aspects to this version of Sonic that I do enjoy. I like that his eyes are a bit more rounded and that his quills are just a little bit shorter as well, making his head a bit more proportionate and making it so that he looks better from the side, especially considering a good chunk of this game was in 2D. That being said, those design elements were not introduced here, so I can't give Sonic Forces the point for that, but we'll get to that. In at number 24 is Sonic 4 Episode 2, which was definitely a visual upgrade from the first Sonic 4 episode. They haven't tried so desperately hard to make this one look retro, and it's all the better for it. Sonic's character model is basically just the basic modern Sonic model with an enlarged head. He's like a bobblehead modern Sonic. But he reacts really nicely to this game's lighting engine as well. Not much to really say on this one, it's fine. You wouldn't want to see it in a 3D game, the head is much too big, but I think for a 2D game and the animations in that game, this works okay. In at number 23 is Sonic's sprite set from Sonic 3D Blast. Yeah, it's 3D, in quotes, but it's still a sprite. And as far as Sonic sprites go, he's definitely less enjoyable to look at than the sprites that preceded him for the 2D games. The shadows are way too harsh, brother, lay off the bronzer, and he's just a lot less expressive than his 2D counterpart. I do have a soft spot for the Sonic model that they were using for things like the title screen artwork and the cutscenes, but I do think his in-game sprite is not the best he's ever looked. In at number 22 is the sprite from Sonic Mania. Sonic Mania is obviously a fantastic looking game, but this Sonic sprite looks like I could chew him and blow bubbles with him. I do not love the shade of blue they went for here. Very much a bubblegum blue, and I understand why they had to do this. Post 2011, now that we've got modern Sonic and classic Sonic as their own sort of separate sides to this IP, they want to differentiate them, and one of the things they always do to accommodate for that is make classic Sonic a lighter blue. So rather than him looking like his Sonic 2 or Sonic 3 shade, he looks like this. There's a really nice definition to this model, it's just that shade of blue that throws me off. This could have looked so good. Whoever made these sprites did an absolutely phenomenal job. I just really don't like that shade. Also, this one little highlight on the side of his head here. Tiny detail, I know, I just prefer Sonic to look a bit more matted. Get ready to hear a lot about that when we get to the classic Sonic sprites. In at number 21 are the sprites from Sonic Advance, which, I'm sorry, I know these are a lot of people's favorite looks for Sonic in 2D. I just don't share that opinion. I don't think it's bad. I'm not massive on how flat the top and front of his head look, how narrow his quills are, or the shade that they've gone for his skin texture. I think this is way too contrasty. But I do like that they went for a more cartoony look for this, looking a little bit like Sonic X in game form. But also this single little dot here that's supposed to be a mouth, get rid of that. Sonic looks better without a mouth. I've always thought Sonic characters in sprite form look better without mouths. Sue me. In at number 20 is the model from Sonic the Fighters. Holy nightmare of flat topology, how does this work? There is not a single piece of smoothing on this model at all. I highly doubt that was a deliberate decision at the time. This guy has a crust. But today you could easily pass this off as a deliberate art style choice. And he's got a lot of personality to him, which I really like. In number 19 is the model from Sonic R. It is amazing how there are like 3 polygons on this guy. And that's an exaggeration, but I'm probably not far from it. And yet he exudes such personality. He's just a little scrunkly scrimbler. Take Sonic, take away all the details, make him completely angular, and you end up with this. And there's a reason why people love this little guy decades later. But once again, like with the Sonic the Fighters model, those technological limitations have looped back round today to look like deliberate art style choices. And I, for one, dig it. In at number 18 is the classic Sonic model from Sonic Generations. Taking the classic Sonic design and translating it into a 3D art style, this time without the technological limitations of 90s console hardware, must have had its challenges. And there are definitely a few elements that do get lost in the translation. This version of classic Sonic does look just a bit more babyfied than previous artwork has depicted classic Sonic as looking. But when all is said and done, this is still an excellent recreation recreation of the classic Sonic. He's incredibly expressive, and there are elements of both the Japanese classic Sonic design and the Western classic Sonic design that have all been kind of brought into the mix here. Predominantly, it is the Japanese one, but there are elements of the Western designs, such as those thick eyebrows, his little piggy ears. This design does still rock today, even if there are fan-made versions of this design that I prefer. In at number 17 is Sonic's model from Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Now, it is funny how conversation has kind of shifted surrounding this model, and in a lot of ways this game as well. In the aftermath of Sonic 06, people wanted the modern Sonic to resemble the classic Sonic a little more. They wanted smaller proportions, a more rounded look. This was dismissed as being overly lanky, but now that the Dreamcast kids are all growing up, we're kind of seeing a new surge in appreciation for this character model, as it is arguably the closest to that Yuikawa Sonic artwork. Sonic looks like a stretchy dude. He just looks incredibly dynamic here. All the proportions have been dialed up to their absolute extremes, and I gotta appreciate it for that. That being said, execution is another thing. For a Sonic game that's trying to be a bit more realistic, this design doesn't really work very well. He's got arguably some of the most cartoony proportions of any of the Sonic models, but his animation is entirely mocap. And yeah, as a remnant of the early Xbox 360 era, this model definitely shows its age. I think there's probably a lot of appreciation for this model and its design sensibilities coming from Project 06 by Chaos X, which uses a revised version of this model. And I gotta say, yeah, that model is one of the best Sonic models ever made, period. But I'm not including fan stuff on this list. In at number 16 is the model from Sonic Rush. A bit of low poly modern Sonic goodness, and just look at the little scrunkly. Look at his little shoes. He is just a little guy. He is so incredibly, utterly crunchy. Just an incredibly crunchy fella. He is designed to be seen from a distance, but he only looks better the closer you get. Just incredibly deep fried would go well with a side of bacon. That's probably the best analysis I've ever done. In at number 15 is the model from Sonic Superstars. Basically a fine-tuned version of the Sonic Generations version of classic Sonic, and it doesn't really fix the problem of classic Sonic looking a little bit babified this time. In fact, they've only made that worse with his default facial expression being the Kirby facial expression. But this model reacts to lighting beautifully. I really like the new style of shading, particularly on his eyes. I'd still prefer a darker shade of blue to this, but also he just has such a squish to him. He's very squishy. That's also helped by the animations. I know that the people that indulge in the cool versus cute debate probably hate me right now, but just wait till you see my number one pick because it's gonna blow your mind. And personally, you know, I don't have an issue with some Sonic games being cuter, some Sonic games focusing more on the cool aspects. He's always been both, and I think this little dude here is still both. In number 14 is the Sprite set from Sonic the Hedgehog 3. You are a fat hedgehog. Bloated, rotund even. You have a mouth, but admittedly that looks pretty good on CRT screens. You are cross-eyed. Your fists are enormous, and your shoes look like hot dogs. Yeah, this Sonic looks overweight and lost, like a deer in the headlights. Sonic 3 may be the best classic Sonic game ever made, but it sure as hell didn't have the best classic Sonic sprite. But it still has a lot of charm to it, and what they were doing with this was fairly revolutionary. This was the most three-dimensional a classic Sonic sprite had ever looked at the time. Also, this was the first time that one of these classic Sonic sprites actually looked like the quills were connected to his head, rather than them being a mohawk. I can really see why Greg Martin interpreted it as a mohawk looking at the older sprites. I do have a lot of love for this sprite, but it definitely isn't the best of the classic Sonic sprite sets. Also, he's so shiny. He's like a car. In at number 13 is the Sonic 1 sprite, also used in Sonic CD. And he does look like a scrappy little dude that would hang out in the outdoor garbage. Snaggletooth ass. This sprite gets funnier if you imagine the highlight on his snoot being a massive teardrop. He's crying. He's having such a hard time that he's crying. His narrow eyes make for quite a blank facial expression, and this shade of blue is borderlining on gray. But this was the sprite that started it all, so it deserves a little respect for that. And it's still a great sprite, got a great definition to it. Sonic's design is translated really well here. 5 stars, really. And at number 12 is the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 sprite. Very similar to the Sonic 1 sprite, except now he's in a nice, rich shade of blue, which looks 10 times better. They've also just slightly altered the shape of his eyes, so now he looks a bit more determined. So yeah, just a couple of little decisions made this sprite look 10 times better. The one and only thing that I don't like about this version of the sprite over the first game sprite is this here. This little highlight on the side of his head. Why does he have that? What is he made of? Is he plastic? Is he rubber? I get that was the sensibility of the time, though. A means of making things look that bit more tangible. Sonic Mania Sprite has no excuse for that. Well, aside from being a throwback anyway. I just want to wipe him. Sonic looks better when he's matte. In number 11 is the model from Sonic Rumble. What we have here is effectively a little mashup between the modern and classic Sonic. He's got those little guy proportions of the classic Sonic, with some of the design sensibilities and detail of the modern Sonic. Now, in terms of meeting that cool versus cute criteria balance here, yeah, this one's fully blown in the cute direction. This guy's adorable. But this model does do one thing better than a lot of other Sonic models, in my opinion anyway. And it's the proportions of his hands, feet, arms, and legs. His arms and legs aren't overly thin, and his hands and feet aren't overly massive, allowing him to nail that headbanging emote every single time, and that is my favorite emote in this game. It is just precious. I'll do a Sonic Rumble video soon, I promise. Also, while this model is a little shinier, it has a reason for it. He's meant to be a toy, and he looks like a toy. I want one. But here's the thing, I want him to come out of a plastic bag like a Happy Meal toy. I would like a Sonic Rumble Happy Meal, please, with a McRib inside. In at number 10 is the modern Sonic model from Sonic Generations. And this guy looks great. You'd absolutely be forgiven for mistaking this for the Sonic Unleashed model. However, they did downgrade this model quite a bit for Sonic Generations. The Sonic Unleashed model was very high poly, with very high res textures. This one, a little bit more downscaled, all to accommodate for better performance, which, yeah, Unleashed had a problem with back in the day. It works well, and you can't tell much of a difference between this and the Unleashed version. But I will say I am not fond of how this model interacts with light. Sonic's skin textures occasionally looking cheese yellow, borderlining on green in the opening cutscene. That is more to do with the lighting of Sonic Generations, though. The lighting in this game is not great. As far as a downscaled version of the Unleashed model goes, though, I can't believe it's not Unleashed. Also, because his mouth geometry is a bit less detailed than it was on the Unleashed model, they've compensated by building that into the texture, which gives him this little weird brown outline around his mouth, which I'm not fond of. In at number 9 is the model from Sonic Lost World. And remember when I was saying that Sonic Forces couldn't claim credit for the nicer aspects of the Sonic Forces modern model? That's because that all originated in Sonic Lost World. You'd be forgiven for mistaking this for the Sonic Generations model, but no, they've shortened his quills out, which makes his head look a bit more proportionate now. From the side, only 3 quills are visible now, as opposed to just the hodgepodge of quills that he had from the side with, say, Sonic Generations. And the shape of his eyes is a bit more smooth and flowy now. The difference between this and the Forces one, though, is that he doesn't look anemic. The textures appear to be near identical to that of the Sonic Generations version, which looks much better. A nice richer shade of blue. Yeah, all in all, better. In at number 8 is the model from Sonic Frontiers. Maybe it's a bit of a hot take, but I really do like how Sonic looks in Sonic Frontiers. That's not me saying he couldn't be animated and lit better, and from when I've played with this model myself, rigged better as well. Jesus Christ. No wonder he barely moves his eyebrows, this model just breaks. And the subsurface scattering on him is completely busted. What is subsurface scattering? Well, you know how when you shine a torch through your fingers, your skin illuminates? Yeah, it's meant to mean that Sonic's skin textures will react to light and kind of illuminate, thus confirming that that is not fur, that is skin. You could slap him on the tummy like a little pig. Well, I don't know what exact thing they've done incorrectly with the subsurface scattering. I think it might have to do with the normals being flipped the wrong way, but it means that light really does just shine through this guy's skin, causing him to look like a porcelain lamp. And that's really, really bad, don't get me wrong, but if you fix that, you've actually got a really nice little model here. The blue is nice and vibrant and has a nice deal of depth to it. I like that they're sticking with the Lost World proportions, and I love the fur texture that they've added to him. He looks very soft now. It's not detailed fur like the Werehog or the movie designs. It's subtle. From a distance, you might not necessarily notice it. There's been a slight furry look to Sonic ever since, say, Sonic Unleashed, but here they've really doubled down on it, giving it a little bit more depth. I really like how that looks, and I hope they will stick with that in the future. It definitely needs some tweaks, some polish, some fine-tuning, much like the entirety of Sonic Frontiers, but this model still looks really nice. In at number 7 is the model from Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. Yeah, I know, this is going to be controversial, just sit tight, don't panic. I like the Boom designs. Not as a replacement for the classic looks by any stretch, but I do like these designs. And there are elements of these designs that I dare say are an improvement over the modern designs. Namely the proportions, the limbs, the feet, the hands, the heads. all a lot more workable, and it shows in the animation of this game. These guys look a lot more expressive, and they look a lot better for it. Honest to God, I think these models are good, especially for Sonic. Okay, Amy has a case of the Muppet mouth, but other than that, these guys are great. I said what I said. These models look really nice, the detail is just about right, I like the textures, and the overall rigs for these guys are excellent. So yeah, I think the Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric model deserves this spot on this list. Not only is it visually pleasing, it's also versatile. Coming in at number 6 is the model from Sonic Dream Team. Now, this is a bit more low poly than, say, the Sonic Generations model. It's probably a little more comparable to, say, the Sonic Colors model. And yeah, being that this is a mobile game, they are working within certain technical limitations, but that being said, this model looks absolutely fantastic. I definitely appreciate the size of his eyes this time, as in like the iris themselves is a little bigger than they're usually portrayed. He's a really nice shade of blue, he reacts well to the game's lighting engine, looks better in-game than the Sonic Generations one because of that. If I were to describe how Sonic looks in Sonic Dream Team, I'd say he's kind of cosmic. But this also has one of the better rigs of any of the Sonic models as well. This Sonic can move his mouth from side to side without it snapping, and his rig allows for far more facial expressions than the Sonic Frontiers model does. And it really shows. On a whole, this is a great model, they've worked within their limitations and produced something that looks way better than the sum of its parts, while also adding some new tweaks that the Sonic models have desperately needed for a while now, that being the expressive facial features and mouth. In at number 5 is Sonic's model from the Storybook games, namely Sonic and the Secret Rings in this case. I adore the way this Sonic looks. Everything about this model is just right. I like how his fur is shiny without looking plastic. It's got a very nice rich color to it. I love how rounded his face and eyes are. There is just such a nice flow to how this design comes together. That just makes him incredibly pleasing to look at. His proportions look good, his colors look great, his face looks fantastic. I wish more modern Sonic models would use this as kind of the basis for how his design looks, because this is damn near perfect. In at number 4 is Sonic's model from Sonic Unleashed, and it is safe to say that Sonic Team flew too close to the sun with this one, but goddamn I respect it. Here we have an incredibly high poly, incredibly high resolution Sonic model that was built to complement this brand new next-gen lighting engine, well, at the time it came out anyway. Sonic Team wanted Sonic Unleashed to look like a Pixar film, both in cutscenes and in gameplay, and I'd say they damn near succeeded at that. But it's funny because while environments and NPCs might be a bit lower poly, this Sonic model right here does look like something straight out of a Pixar movie. He's also nice and expressive as well, leading me to believe that his rig must be fairly good, even if I haven't really played around with it myself. Of course, it does come at the cost of the game's performance, and this isn't my favorite Sonic design-wise anyway, but this had to get a high-up spot on this list just for being such a high-quality model. In at number 3 is the sprite set from The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, and yeah, this is basically an easy win. I've always preferred the way Sonic looks in illustrations to 3D models, and bringing on artists from the IDW Comics Digimin to do the artwork for this game meant that the game was going to look gorgeous. And yeah, Digimin didn't miss a beat when it came to these character sprites. This artwork is on point. Every little detail just perfect. From how expressive Sonic looks, with of course his many different expressions as well, to how much movement is portrayed in these still images, you can really see how Sonic is carrying himself with his little fancy dress outfit on. On a whole, perfect. But here's where we're getting into some personal biases now, because we've got the top 2. In at number 2 is Sonic's model from Sonic Adventure 2. And on all objective counts, this is probably a big improvement from the model in Sonic Adventure 1. Iwakawa's slick artwork design sensibilities are much better translated in this model right here. Sonic looks radical, from the shape of his rubber hosey limbs, to how his quills curl around his head, and who could forget the soap shoes. And when he's teched out, he just looks awesome. Obviously the model does show its age, but it still looks fantastic. This is Sonic at his coolest, and this model really radiates that cheeky energy. But in first place, we have the model from the original Dreamcast version of Sonic Adventure. Remember when I said this wasn't an objective ranking? It's not. This guy just produces a lot of serotonin in my brain. He's shaped like a friend. And in terms of the cool versus cute factor, this is the cutest, most scrunkly Sonic has ever looked, yet he's also cool as hell. Just look at this absolute goober. He is so rad. Look at how round his head is. He is friend-shaped. I would like to be his friend. I am his friend. All of his different expressions as well, yeah, they look goofy, they look stupid, that's why I love them. This little guy right here can do no wrong, which is why he is number 1 on my list. But what do you guys think? Who's your favorite game, Sonic? Who is your least favorite? Why? Leave your rankings down in the comments. Discuss. And if you've enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and in the description below is the link to my Patreon page, where for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name in the credits of these videos, with a special shout out going to the patrons in the $5 and above tier. We have Josh Strider, Big Mum, Grant Allen, Zach Strand, Shady Sham, Twilord, Coco210, Nigel Thrashner, Hey It's Classy, Jay Sevian, Ian, Shohenshin, KB, RT0, Carlex, Hypes, Sad Goku, Dare Denny, SSS06, KO Bennett, Ken K, Mr. SP, Cyrus the Skeptic, Biotin, oh no, I've used up all of the helium, what am I meant to do now? And Vera Wild. Thank you so much to you generous folks and all the new faces among you. There has been quite a resurgence in my Patreon numbers recently, and that makes me so happy. It is a huge help. Patrons, I will get to work on those thank you notes. It's gonna happen soon, now that I am pretty much recovered from this cold. Everybody at home, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Now get out of here.